I can still picture the way the sunlight poured through our living room window that Thursday afternoon, turning the dust motes into lazy golden specks. It was one of those deceptively calm moments that fools you into believing everything is normal. I was on my day off, casually tidying up the house while my wife, Lillian, was at work. She worked as an event coordinator at a nearby hotel, busy days, unpredictable hours, the usual. I headed into our bedroom to hang up a few pieces of laundry. That's when I noticed it, an unfamiliar jacket tossed across a chair in the corner. I blinked, certain at first that it was just something of mine I didn't remember buying. But a closer look debunked that idea fast. The jacket was too large for Lillian, but also too snug to be one of my own. The brand wasn't familiar either, some expensive label that neither of us normally wore. I froze. The strangest part wasn't just that it was an unfamiliar jacket, but that it looked worn in, like it had been used for a while. It wasn't a new purchase, not the sort of thing Lillian might impulsively buy as a gift. Yet there it sat, brazenly lying in our bedroom as if it belonged. A dozen thoughts whirled through my mind. Maybe someone had left it behind after a visit. But we hadn't hosted any guests recently, at least none that would wear something like that. Could Lillian have borrowed it from a friend? Possibly, but something about the situation gave me a deep, queasy feeling. And there was another tiny clue that made my heart rate spike, a faint scent of cologne clung to the collar. I lifted the jacket carefully, almost as though it might burn my fingers. I felt a rush of adrenaline, the kind you experience when a puzzle piece lands in a place it doesn't belong. The cologne was unfamiliar, unlike anything I'd smelled on Lillian or on her close friends. I flipped open the inside pocket, half dreading what I might find. There was a single business card tucked into a slot. It read, Mark Hillman, consultant with a phone number. I'd never heard of the name. I stood there, wrestling with wild suspicions. Was Lillian cheating on me? Had a strange man been in my house? Even as I formed the question, I rejected it. That wasn't the Lillian I knew. She was loyal, straightforward, the kind of person who'd lay out a problem on the table rather than hide it. Yet the jacket was real. I couldn't ignore it. Confusion gave way to a cold dread that trickled down my spine. When Lillian came home that evening, I tried to act normal. I almost felt guilty about my suspicions. She breezed in wearing a professional blazer and pencil skirt, shoulders slumped from a long day. We exchanged pleasantries in the kitchen. She recapped the day's events, a corporate luncheon that ran overtime, a last-minute party booking that nearly fell through. My mind, though, was on the jacket resting in our bedroom. At last, I cleared my throat and asked, "Hey, by the way, do you know anything about that jacket in our room?" She blinked, her expression genuinely perplexed. Jacket? Which one? I attempted a casual shrug. Some dark gray jacket with a strange label inside. I found it on the chair. She frowned in thought, then shook her head. I don't know whose that is. Are you sure it's not yours? Her response was so quick and seemingly sincere that my nerves prickled with confusion. It's definitely not mine. Too small, and it has this cologne smell. Lillian gave me an uncertain look. That's odd. Maybe one of the maintenance guys at the hotel left it when he dropped me off the other night. She didn't sound very convinced. Besides, Lillian rarely accepted rides from coworkers. Her reaction wasn't the indignant denial I'd expect if she was hiding something. Nor was it an aha moment of recollection. She genuinely appeared baffled. Yet part of me still felt uneasy, because if she had no clue, then how on earth did it get here? Later that night, when Lillian stepped into the shower, I pulled out my phone, retrieved the business card from the jacket's pocket, and Googled Mark Hillman consultant. My search turned up a LinkedIn profile for someone in a city an hour away, but there was no photo attached. The job description was vague: management, finance, project oversight, the usual buzzwords. On impulse, I dialed the phone number. It rang 4 times before a voicemail kicked in. "You've reached Mark Hillman. Please leave a message." I hung up without saying anything. There I was, phone in hand, heart pounding in my ears. Why was I sneaking around my own home? I felt like an intruder in my own life, searching for clues to a mystery I wasn't sure I wanted to unravel. But curiosity is powerful, especially when laced with suspicion. After I put my phone away, a swirl of guilt tugged at me. Was I overreacting? Could there be a perfectly mundane explanation? Maybe Mark Hillman came by for some professional reason, forgot his jacket, and that's all there is to it. But if that were true, why hadn't Lillian mentioned it? And where had she been when the jacket was presumably left behind? That night, I hardly slept. My dreams were a haze of half-familiar figures drifting through our house, ghostly silhouettes wearing that same gray jacket. I kept waking up, heart racing, reaching out to touch Lillian next to me as though needing reassurance that she was still there, still mine. But each time, the memory of that mystery jacket invaded my thoughts like an unwelcome houseguest. Over the next few days, I tried to keep track of Lillian's schedule. Was she gone more often? Did she seem evasive? Part of me hated the idea of spying on my own wife, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was amiss. Strangely, nothing stood out. Lillian left for work at her usual time, returned in the evenings, sometimes a bit late, but never suspiciously so. Her phone didn't blow up with secret texts. She wasn't distancing herself from me. If anything, she seemed concerned that I was acting weird. More than once, she asked, "Is everything okay? You've been quiet." I couldn't admit I was hung up on that jacket. Instead, I busied myself with chores, found excuses to fiddle with my phone in another room, and avoided deep conversations. Each time I considered bringing it up, I imagined her reaction. Maybe she would be outraged that I doubted her. Maybe she would start telling me more lies if she truly was hiding something. By the 4th day, I'd worked myself into a knot of tension. The jacket was still there, unclaimed. Lillian had stashed it in the back of our closet, saying, "If someone calls or texts about it, we'll return it." But no one did. No word from Mark Hillman, no explanation from Lillian, no call from any friend or colleague. Then, on a lazy Saturday afternoon, something shifted. Lillian was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a text notification, "Unknown number." I glanced at it, the notification banner revealing only a snippet of text, "We need to," before it disappeared. Temptation pulled at me. Should I check her phone and read the full message? I hated the idea of invading her privacy. But the jacket. The creeping suspicions. The pang in my gut that warned me not all was well. I told myself, if she isn't hiding anything, then this is no big deal. With trembling fingers, I picked up the phone and keyed in the passcode I knew by heart, her birthday. My heart hammered as I opened the message thread. The same unknown number had sent multiple messages in the past 3 days. Fragments popped out: "Situation is tricky, need confirmation, call me when you can." No name. My chest went tight. There was no direct mention of a meeting or an affair, no confessions of love or secrets. Yet the tone was undeniably urgent. If Lillian had no clue whose jacket it was, then who was texting her from a number she hadn't saved? I locked the phone and set it back on the counter, guilt twisting my stomach. I felt dirty for snooping, but I couldn't deny that the mystery was deepening. I found an unfamiliar jacket in our house. My wife swears she doesn't recognize it. Now there's a series of cryptic messages from an unknown number. I had no proof of wrongdoing, just a swirling mass of doubts. But that was enough to keep me on edge, unable to brush away the question that kept resurfacing: was my wife lying to me, and if so, why? I didn't mention the unknown messages to Lillian right away. My mind raced with possible explanations. Maybe they were work-related. Maybe they were from an old friend whose number she'd lost. But each time I recalled that strange jacket, doubt resurged like a stubborn tide. 2 days later, I decided to call the unknown number from my phone. An automated voice announced the number was no longer in service. That rattled me. Whoever had sent Lillian those messages must have changed or deactivated the line. Why so quickly? I went home that evening determined to be direct. Lillian was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She seemed tired, but calm. I set my keys on the table and asked, "Hey, can we talk?" She turned, ladle in hand. "Sure. What's up?" "Those texts you got from that unknown number," I said, forcing myself to look her in the eye. "They looked urgent. Is everything okay?" Her lips parted in surprise, or was it guilt? "You checked my phone." I winced. "I'm sorry." It buzzed, and I was worried. Her shoulders sagged. "They're from a client connected to my job. I was trying to help them secure a venue. It's been a nightmare." She claimed it was a tricky client, someone who insisted on privacy. No names, no personal details, just business. The phone number changed because he was paranoid about corporate leaks. I pressed, "And the jacket? Could it be his?" She shook her head. "I've never even met him in person. All our communication was online or by phone." I studied her face. She didn't appear to be lying, but how could I be sure? Eventually, I let it drop. If I pushed too hard, I'd only drive her away. Still, tension lingered like static in the air. The following week, my friend Carter invited me out for coffee. He's known me long enough to sense when something's off. After some small talk, he asked point blank, "Are you okay? You seem jumpy." I hesitated but ended up telling him about the jacket. He frowned. "Dude, that's weird. You sure Lillian's not up to something?" "I'm not sure of anything," I admitted. Carter leaned in. "Maybe you should talk to her coworkers. See if she's really working those extra hours." It felt extreme, but worry was eating me alive. The next day, I dropped by Lillian's hotel after hours. The lobby was quiet, a single staff member behind the front desk. I asked for Lillian, expecting she might still be on site. The staffer shook his head. "She left early today." My pulse kicked. She'd told me she'd be late. So where was she? Outside, I hovered near my car, phone in hand, debating whether to call. Just then, Lillian's car pulled up across the street. She hopped out, alone, but the passenger door also swung open. A man emerged, wearing a baseball cap and a jacket not unlike the one in our house. They spoke for a moment. When Lillian noticed me watching, her eyes went wide. The man got back into the car and drove off as she hurried over. I tried to remain calm. "Who was that?" She faltered. "A colleague. We had to pick up some supplies. I saw you here and panicked. It's not what it looks like." Her breath was shallow. She seemed genuinely worried about my reaction. But my trust was wearing thin. "And your coworker's name?" She hesitated. "Jason." I pressed, "Is Jason also known as Mark Hillman?" She paled at the name. "Where did you get that idea?" I showed her the business card. "It was in the jacket at home. You said you didn't know him, but you're acting suspicious." She inhaled sharply, voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I never told you because I thought you'd misunderstand. Jason is Mark's associate, he asked me to keep his involvement quiet. There's a high-profile event at the hotel, and they don't want leaks." I stood there, torn between relief and suspicion. So the unknown texts were from Mark or Jason? She nodded. "Yes, but I promise, it's about work. I'm under a strict confidentiality agreement." Her excuses might be true, but I'd reached a point where words alone weren't enough. We drove home in near silence, tension thick as smoke. Unable to shake my doubts, I searched our house more thoroughly the next day. At the back of a rarely used closet, I found a small box labeled "Old Files." Inside, I expected old receipts or photos. Instead, I saw a folder containing official-looking papers and a second jacket. This one looked similar to the first but worn in a different way. More cologne, this time a different scent. A slip of paper was tucked into an inside pocket, "Dinner at 7, Redwood Grill." Yesterday's date. That was the same night Lillian claimed to be working late. My hands shook as I processed the implications. She was out with someone at the Redwood Grill. I heard footsteps behind me. Lillian stood in the doorway, her eyes locked on the jacket in my hands. Her face turned pale. "Where did you find that?" My heart pounded. "Why is there a second jacket? And what's with the dinner note?" Her expression was grim. "I don't have time to explain now." I almost shouted. "You've got to be kidding me." "I swear, it's not what you think," she insisted, voice trembling. "Let me gather my thoughts. Just, trust me a little longer." She backed out of the room, tears forming in her eyes. Everything was unraveling. If she wasn't cheating, then why 2 jackets? Why the secret dinner? Why the cryptic messages and shifting phone numbers? I stared at the jacket, my mind churning. Lillian's tears seemed real. But the evidence suggested betrayal. Did I want the truth, or was I afraid of it? My mind wouldn't settle after discovering that second jacket. Lillian's insistence that she needed time to explain only fueled my suspicion. I wanted hard facts, not vague excuses. That night, I resolved to get answers. When Lillian finally emerged from the bedroom, she looked haunted. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded tight, knuckles white. "It's not what you think," she began again, voice unsteady. "But I see why you'd assume I'm cheating." I folded my arms, forcing myself to stay calm. "Then talk. Show me why these jackets, these dinners, these messages are innocent." She drew a shaky breath. "The hotel has been trying to land a lucrative contract, one that involves wealthy clients who don't want their identities revealed. Mark Hillman is a go-between, and Jason is his associate. They have a habit of leaving personal items or notes behind as part of their security routine. They want to make sure I'm discreet, that I won't leak info. Some kind of loyalty test." "Loyalty test?" I echoed, frowning. She nodded. "They asked me to keep the items safe and not mention them to anyone, even you. Whenever they text me from unknown numbers, it's to check if I'm keeping the secret." The Redwood Grill meeting was to finalize details, not a date. The explanation sounded bizarre, but Lillian doubled down. She opened her phone's gallery, showing me a few photos. One showed her at the Redwood Grill with a suit-clad man, definitely older, formal, not someone you'd expect her to be romantically involved with. Another photo showed the same man handing her what looked like a small envelope. "They're hush-hush about everything," she said. "I was told if I leaked any names or details, the deal would fall through. And my boss was desperate to secure this contract, so I followed along." I scanned her face. She could be telling the truth. Or she could be weaving a story around carefully curated photos. My gut still churned with doubt, but at least her confession was detailed. I told Carter about Lillian's explanation. He raised an eyebrow. "Test of loyalty. Leaving jackets and weird clues. That sounds shady." "It is," I agreed, "but it might not be an affair." "So you're gonna drop it?" I shrugged. "Not quite. I want to confirm her story." Carter proposed a plan: we'd visit the Redwood Grill to see if any staff remembered Lillian and the men. Maybe they'd confirm or deny her story. That evening, we went. We spoke with a manager, showing a photo of Lillian with the man. The manager nodded. Yes, they were here. The gentleman paid in cash. Polite, but kept to himself. It was something. At least it proved Lillian had indeed met with a mystery man for business, or so it seemed. Carter still looked skeptical. Could still be a cover, but it's more plausible now. I felt a small weight lift from my chest. Maybe she really wasn't cheating. But the jackets? The secrecy? Something still felt off. As the days wore on, one question nagged at me: why leave jackets in our house? If these men were testing Lillian's discretion, they could do it by other means. This seemed overly elaborate. Late one night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: stop digging. Keep the items safe. My blood ran cold. I confronted Lillian immediately. She insisted she had nothing to do with the text. They must have tracked your involvement somehow, she said, eyes anxious. It proves how serious they are about confidentiality. A surge of anger flared. I never asked for this. They can't just threaten me. She grimaced. I know. I'm sorry. The contract is nearly final. Once it's signed, they'll stop playing these games. A week later, Lillian came home looking tense. Mark Hillman is pushing for one last test before signing. He wants me to deliver some private documents to him, no questions asked. Carter's words about everything being shady echoed in my head. This sounds illegal. Did you talk to your boss? My boss said to do whatever it takes, but I'm scared. I'd get fired if I refuse. Maybe even blacklisted in the industry. But this might be crossing a line. It dawned on me then, maybe Mark Hillman was more than just an eccentric middleman. Could he be using the hotel deal as a cover for illicit transactions, exploiting Lillian as a pawn? No wonder they used secrecy, random texts, and jacket drops. Each item could have hidden pockets or documents inside. I felt a chill. You have to stop. If you continue, you could be complicit in something bigger. Her face fell. Then I lose my job. Better that than your freedom, I retorted. She wrapped her arms around herself. What do I do? We both knew the tension had escalated past simple suspicion of an affair. This was a potential criminal trap. Just when we decided we'd refuse Mark's test, a new twist emerged. Lillian received a message from her manager at the hotel: the big contract had been cancelled. The official statement cited a lack of mutual trust on the client's side. A second message followed from Mark himself: contract is off. Return everything or face consequences. Those jackets in our house. They might hold more than random notes or business cards. I tore through them again. Hidden in the lining of one jacket, I found a small flash drive. Inside a seam of the other, a folded sheet of thick paper covered in cryptic symbols. We realized, horrified, that Lillian had been storing hidden data for Mark without knowing its significance. Panic overtook Lillian. He'll think we stole it. That's why he said, face consequences. The next day, we discovered Lillian's car windows smashed. No valuables taken, just a warning, perhaps. A note on the dashboard read, "You have 1 week to comply." I stood with Lillian in our driveway, our home suddenly feeling unsafe. My earlier fear that she might be cheating felt almost trivial compared to the danger now confronting us. We paced the kitchen, deciding our next move. Turn everything over to Mark. Hand it to the police. Either choice carried risks. If Mark had serious connections, involving law enforcement could make things worse. But giving in to him could trap us in a criminal ring. As the clock ticked, Lillian looked at me with tear-filled eyes. I'm sorry, she said. I never meant for any of this to happen. I pulled her close, confusion roiling inside me. Our marriage, once tested by doubts of infidelity, now hung in the balance for an entirely different reason. These jackets, these messages, the flash drive, none of it was about romance or betrayal. It was about secrets and criminal leverage. Outside, a car's headlights swept across our window, casting eerie shapes on the wall. We felt watched, cornered. We had only days to decide who to trust, how to escape Mark's threat, and whether our marriage could withstand what might come next. And in that tense silence, we faced a single question: was it too late to break free, or could we outmaneuver forces far more cunning than we ever imagined? Midnight found us huddled in the living room, curtains drawn tight, lights off. Outside, the wind scraped branches against the siding. Every noise made us jump. Neither of us had slept more than a few hours in days, and our nerves were frayed. We knew the 1-week deadline was almost up. I stared at the hidden flash drive and cryptic paper we'd discovered inside those jackets. Lillian's job was on the line. Our safety was on the line. Every option felt like a trap. Option 1, return everything to Mark. That might buy us short-term peace, but it also let him vanish with whatever incriminating material he possessed. We'd remain vulnerable if he ever came back demanding more. Option 2, go to the police. If Mark had the connections we feared, we could be targeted, even framed for something bigger. Lillian might lose her career. Option 3, destroy the items and hope Mark couldn't prove we still had them. That could spark retaliation. We debated until our heads pounded. Finally, we decided to trust one person, my friend Carter. He was no cop, but he had street smarts and a knack for navigating tough situations. If anyone could help us decide the lesser evil, it was him. We met at his place before dawn, each of us sipping coffee in a tense silence. Carter examined the paper with the strange symbols, flipping it under a desk lamp. He plugged the flash drive into a spare laptop. Seconds later, a string of encrypted folders appeared. "This is serious," Carter muttered, eyes narrowed. "It's financial data. Looks like offshore accounts, transaction logs. Some of these names look familiar from high-profile corruption cases." Lillian paled. "You're saying Mark is dealing in black market info?" "Could be. Or maybe blackmail material." He frowned. "No wonder he threatened you. If you hand it to the authorities, he's toast. Then again, it might put you in the crosshairs of whoever else is involved." We sat in heavy silence. Carter finally offered a bold suggestion: "I know a journalist who specializes in exposing financial crimes. We could hand these documents over anonymously. If she releases it all, Mark loses his leverage, and neither of you are directly implicated as whistleblowers." I exchanged a look with Lillian. "But he'll suspect us anyway. How do we protect ourselves?" Carter's jaw set. "We make it clear that if anything happens to you, more evidence gets released. It's risky, but it might be the only way to keep Mark from retaliating." We agreed, adrenaline coursing through our veins. The plan required us to act quickly, before Mark realized what we were doing. Carter arranged to meet the journalist in a neutral location that same day. Lillian and I stayed behind, waiting for his signal that everything had gone smoothly. Time crawled. The house was deathly quiet, every tick of the clock unbearably loud. Lillian paced, phone clutched in her hand, expecting Mark's next ominous text at any moment. I kept checking the windows, half convinced a black SUV would screech into our driveway. Finally, Carter texted, "Data delivered. Journalist will start verifying everything now. Stand by." Our relief was short-lived. Minutes later, my phone buzzed from the same unknown number that had threatened me before. The message read, "You had 1 week. I don't see your compliance. We're not done." Lillian's eyes went wide. "He knows." I typed back with trembling fingers, "We don't have it anymore. If anything happens to us, the information goes public. Back off." It felt brazen, but Carter had insisted we act unafraid. We waited, hearts pounding. No reply came. For days, we lived on edge. Lillian's boss demanded an explanation for the cancelled contract, but we offered none. We told no one else what we'd done, not even the police. Carter reported that the journalist had begun investigating the files, contacting sources, hinting at a major expose coming soon. Our biggest question, would Mark cut his losses, or strike back in desperation? One evening, Lillian's phone buzzed. She tensed, then showed me the screen. You win this round. But secrets surface eventually. We stared at each other, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. Mark's words carried a sinister undercurrent. Did this mean he was giving up, or just biding his time? A week passed. No broken windows. No more threats. Lillian and I tried to piece our lives back together, though our nights still hummed with tension. We'd been through a whirlwind, suspicions of infidelity, bizarre covert dealings, all culminating in a precarious alliance with a journalist determined to blow Mark's operation wide open. In a quiet moment, Lillian turned to me with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry you ever thought I was cheating. I never wanted to hide anything. But I couldn't risk your safety once I realized how dangerous this was. I pulled her close. Relief and lingering uncertainty warred in my chest. I'm sorry I snooped. But after finding those jackets. She nodded. I understand. Despite our relief, part of me couldn't forget how convincing everything had looked, the dinners, the unclaimed jackets, the cryptic texts. Would there always be a wedge of lingering doubt in our marriage? News broke 3 weeks later. An exposé featured Mark Hillman as a key player in a multi-million-dollar scheme involving corporate espionage and bribes. The piece referenced incriminating files without naming the source. The coverage implied he'd gone underground, possibly fleeing the country. Carter called, voice taut with excitement. This is huge. More people might get indicted. Lillian let out a shaky breath. So it's over. Hopefully, I said, though my gut twisted. Men like Mark seldom fade away quietly. We tried to move on, get back to normal routines. But normal felt different now. Lillian refused any further hush-hush deals at work. She'd rather lose her job than repeat that nightmare. I stopped checking her phone, wanting to rebuild trust. Yet late at night, I still wondered, did we truly escape? Or had Mark planted other traps, other tests, for some future reckoning? Every time a text arrived from an unknown number, our stomachs clenched. Every time Lillian worked late, a tiny, irrational voice in my head asked if there was more to the story. Because deep down, I knew one truth: secrets once found can always be found again. And Mark's final message, secrets surface eventually, hovered like an ominous cloud. Would he reappear to settle some old score? Was there another layer to Lillian's silence that she hadn't confessed? Or did we genuinely outmaneuver him, free to rebuild our marriage in peace? As of now, no further threats have materialized. Carter remains vigilant. The journalist says Mark's network is crumbling. Life trudges on, work, errands, quiet dinners. Lillian and I laugh at jokes, share everyday problems, and do our best to forget the tension that once filled every corner of our home. Still, the memory of an unfamiliar jacket left in our house lingers, a reminder of how easily normalcy can shatter. Sometimes, when I catch Lillian's gaze across the living room, we share a look of relief mixed with caution. We survived a storm, but we don't know if it was the only one. To this day, I haven't thrown away those jackets. They sit folded in a box in the attic, as if I'm waiting for proof we've really escaped or for a reason to fear the past once more. And so we carry on, balancing hope and wariness in equal measure, never quite sure if Mark Hillman is gone for good, or if one day he'll return, demanding the impossible again. Midnight found us huddled in the living room, curtains drawn, lights off. Outside, the wind scraped branches against the siding. Every noise made us jump. Neither of us had slept well in days, and our nerves were raw. The 1-week deadline was almost up. I stared at the hidden flash drive and the cryptic paper we'd found in those jackets. Lillian's job was at stake. Our safety was at stake. Every option felt like a trap. Hand everything back to Mark. That might buy temporary peace, but he'd vanish with the evidence, and we'd stay vulnerable forever. Go to the police and risk him retaliating if he had inside connections. Destroy the items and hope he couldn't prove we still had them, which could provoke revenge. After hours of debate, we turned to my friend Carter, a streetwise confidant who knew the darker corners of our city. He studied the flash drive on a spare laptop, eyes narrowing at lines of encrypted data. "This is more than standard blackmail," he muttered. "Looks like offshore accounts, major financial transactions, high-level corruption." Lillian paled. "No wonder he threatened me. If the authorities get hold of this, he's finished." Carter nodded. "Exactly. But if you pass it to the police, Mark could strike first." We fell silent. Then Carter offered a bold move: we'd give the incriminating files to a journalist who specialized in exposing corrupt financiers. If she went public with it, Mark might lose the leverage he held over us. We decided to move fast. Carter arranged a hush-hush meeting with the journalist that same day. Lillian and I stayed behind, too nervous to do anything but pace the living room. Every passing car made my pulse jump. We were certain Mark had eyes everywhere. Several tense hours later, Carter texted, "Files delivered, journalist verifying now." Relief mixed with dread. If the story went live, Mark would know we betrayed him. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another unknown text: "You had 1 week. Not seeing your compliance. We're not done." Lillian read it, her face blanching. "He knows." Heart pounding, I typed back, "We don't have the files anymore. If anything happens to us, everything goes public. Back off." No response came. But our hands shook for the rest of the night. For days, we lived in a haze of dread, checking phones, glancing out windows. Lillian's hotel boss demanded to know why the big contract fell through, but she kept silent. We told no one except Carter and the journalist about the flash drive's contents. When the journalist's exposé dropped, it sent shockwaves through local media. Mark Hillman was named among several key figures in a complex web of financial crimes. The report hinted he'd gone underground, possibly skipping town. We felt cautious relief: if he was on the run, maybe we were free. But a flicker of worry remained. Men like Mark didn't just surrender. Did he still have hidden allies? One evening, Lillian's phone buzzed. The same unknown number flashed: "You win this round." But secrets surface eventually. 2 sentences, but they carried a brutal chill. Was it a threat or a farewell? We waited for retaliation: broken windows, slashed tires, more ominous texts, but nothing else happened. Days bled into weeks. The story overshadowed Mark's name with bigger headlines: he seemed to vanish. Lillian and I inched toward normalcy. We no longer scoured the yard for lurking strangers. She went back to work, but made it clear she'd refuse any future mystery deals. I apologized for mistrusting her, and she forgave me for the moments of doubt. We tried to put the madness behind us. Still, late at night, we'd sometimes catch each other lying awake, listening for sounds in the dark. I caught myself wondering, could Mark return? Did Lillian tell me everything? Tiny, nagging questions lingered, fueled by fear and memory. For now, our home is quiet. The jackets, paper, and flash drive are gone, passed to someone braver or crazier than us. The fear lingers at the edges of our lives, but we hold on to each other, finding strength in the hope we've seen the last of Mark Hillman. And yet, there's no denying that all it took to shatter our peace was a single unfamiliar jacket. One small clue that led us down a path of secrecy and danger. We don't know if we've truly escaped Mark's world or just slipped out of sight, waiting for him to reappear. But for the moment, we're together, and that might be the only certainty we can cling to.